Welcome to Encouragement for Living Life with Lockwood and Lockwood. The guys are here to encourage you in your attempt to live more confidently and successfully in our world. They are highly trained and experienced mental health professionals, but they are not your mental health professional. They are sharing encouragement through information and discussion. People are complex. Just because an idea helps one person doesn't mean it will help someone else. You need to consult with your own professional who will hopefully know what is best for you and your situation. Now, it's time for Lockwood and Lockwood.
Well, today we're going to talk about treatment resources. Again, this is like part number 3. There's a lot of treatment resources in the world,
Oh
for
yeah.
people that have problems and need help. And this is more geared to typically to young adults, adolescents, these kind of resources, because we're going to talk about long-term residential long-term residential programs, therapeutic communities, wilderness programs, and the issue I find very important is, do you stay in town or
Mm.
do you go out of town for treatment? I'm not a big fan of going out of town if at all possible, and you'll find out why as we talk this out. But I think there's a need for people to go out of town, and there's some situations that are built for these kind of treatment resources. So we want to introduce you. How would you describe long-term residential, son? And this is mainly going to be adolescents and young adults. If you got a child, in this category, this could be something that would be a resource for you.
Yeah, so long-term residential, just so everyone knows, is becoming much and much more a mythical creature because
I'm sure. Yeah.
because what we are finding basically in the last 40 years is that there's two paradoxical relationships in the research. One is the longer you're getting some type of treatment, doesn't matter what kind, the longer you get some type of support, the longer you are likely to stay sober and recover from mental health issues and things like that. So like it's like the duration of treatment is a big predictor of
Right,
outcome.
right.
But there's a paradoxical confound there, which is people burn out very quickly. In fact, the people burn out quicker than you know. And so what we are finding is if you're doing super intensive treatment for more than about 6 months, people burn out and start losing any grounds that they're gaining. So being locked away in Rehabistan for more than 6 months or so is probably going to be, it's my catchphrase, is probably going to be bad for you, actually. There's really not much good just cause for most types of people with most severe, even mental illnesses, to be locked away in some fancy Malibu spot or whatever for more than a couple of months. So, long term treatment can mean different things to different people. That's the reason I started with that preamble. So, for many people nowadays, long term treatment means you're maybe in a detox or residential where you're monitored 24/7, like we talked about a couple episodes ago. And you're
Right.
there for like 30 to 45, maybe 60 days. And then you step down to a lower level of care. And then you're in this like step down experience for maybe 6 months or more. So that might be long term treatment for some people. For other people, they do genuinely mean old school, like lock them away in a rehab and monitor them like a prison for, 6 to 9 months to a year. And that doesn't appear to be helpful for most people. For most people,
Well,
that doesn't encourage them to grow anymore.
well, I don't keep track of the long-term residentials, but I've done a ton of evaluations of adolescents, young adults, and a lot of them have gone through long-term residential. And I remember one case, because I'm with you that if you're spending too much time there, you're often it's not going to help you anymore. But I remember one case, her whole experience long-term residential, the levels and all that kind of stuff was useless. But
Yeah.
she had good outside therapy. She'd go outside for therapy a couple times a week that was really useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So her long-term residential was really about that therapy that helped actually dent some of the stuff going on with her and gave her some relief.
Yeah, and so that's why I wanted to give that preamble is because there's nothing wrong with going to a super intensive, monitored 24/7 program, especially if you're experiencing life-threatening symptoms like pervasive active suicidal ideation or
Right.
homicidal ideation or very severe psychosis or life-threatening withdrawals from drugs. Like, of course, you need a residential or detox or whatever. However, if you stay in residential too long, you're becoming pathologically dependent on pseudo parents, and you're
Well,
not learning to grow up.
you could become pathologically dependent, but a lot of the kids, your categories of people that might need it are far different than the kids I saw that went through it. The kids I
Yeah,
saw that were sent to long-term residential, which, could be 6, 9 months, a year or better,
yeah,
were kids that had drug addiction, drug abuse problems, and other co-occurring disorders at the same time.
yeah,
And in the vast majority of them, including the program that I worked with and their longer term treatment program, often backfired on a lot of kids. They didn't get relief. They felt worse. They felt controlled.
yep,
They never felt cared about in a way that would help motivate change.
correct.
And you pay a ton of money for these programs, often for very little change. Now, I want to tell the audience, I didn't see the people that succeeded. There are
Yeah,
kids that went through them and got a lot from them and helped heal the family by getting
yeah,
them out of town. Hell, I used to send kids to the hospital to give the parents a break. It also
yeah,
was a little
for sure.
message when I was new at what I did, that you're not in control
Correct.
and you need to
Yeah,
know you're not in control. A lot of that was acting out behavior. And it
yeah,
gave the parents some time to get some perspective and know what to do when the child got out of treatment.
yeah.
And it gave the child awareness they hated me, but you're not in charge, dude. You don't know what you need. I do.
Right. And the thing that you just said that I want to highlight, which is very important for this conversation, is exactly that, which is many of these longer term residential programs are terrible for specific kinds of people, but are helpful, especially when there's a family systems problem, which I would love
Correct.
to speak at length about at some
Yeah,
point.
well,
But
yeah, for sure. We
but
will. We will.
but
Yeah.
but when the problem is there's your pathological diagnosable issues or whatever, in addition to you come from a very, very sick system where the family's out of control, or one or both of the parents has a serious drug problem or a personality disorder or whatever it is, sometimes a
Right.
residential program longer term is the best possible thing for
Right
that
on.
kid,
You bet.
because we're getting
Yeah.
them out of a very sick environment and into a less sick environment. Right. And that gives them some hope and some relief and some capacity to be appropriately challenged or appropriately boundaried or whatever it is that they need. So I'm not trying to say all long-term residential is bad, but there's a large group of people, adolescents and young adults, who are sent to these programs who never need to be there. And they should be at an IOP or a PHP or whatever, or just individual therapy a couple of times a week, and they're fine, right? They're acting out, but
Right.
acting out doesn't
Right.
mean you need rehab, right? They have problem behavior. ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, is a parenting disorder. It's not an individual problem, right? And so, like,
Correct.
yeah, and I say that to my grad students, and they stare at me like I'm crazy. Then I explain, they're like, of course, it's a parenting problem. But like, there's so many different types of out of control young adults and teenagers who never need to go to Rehabistan ever.
Oh,
And
no. The lesson, right, that I learned over the years, the more experience I got, the less I ever referred anyone to treatment.
yeah, because they don't
Because
need it.
there's a truism that people in these residential programs, even acute care facilities,
Yeah.
have the least experience and training compared to people that sit in chairs like mine and yours. So if understand people in a healthy way, in a helpful way, then you can often prevent a need for a structured treatment program.
So the only pushback I have is extremely self-serving, which is I have an entire business as a consultant where I go into rehabs and I teach people how to see things and I do clinical
I, I
supervision.
can't help you with that, son.
So
No,
what I
look,
would like,
people.
some of us are actually trying to improve these programs in that way. So let's be honest, like I have a business to run here, so be careful. Um,
Well, no, it's
but
not meant. There are people that need intensive outpatients. There's people that need sober living. There's people that need all kind of things. But I think the point is, the more highly skilled the therapist or counselor is, the more they can do in an outpatient setting. The least restrictive environment is the best environment.
Correct,
You know.
correct. So I would generally say avoid long-term residential treatment if at all possible. Because essentially, the American Society of Addiction Medicine says we should try and start at the lowest level of care and see if they fail out of it first, right? That's kind of their bar. And I agree with that generally. However, it should be readily abundant. If you go to sessions a couple of times a week and nothing gets better, maybe it's time to kick it up a notch.
Well, I can tell you from my experience with parents doing these comprehensive assessments I've done on adolescents, young adults, a lot of the kids I saw had been through multiple long-term treatments of different kinds, short, longer, multiple, and they failed because no one ever identified what the resistance was to the treatment.
Yeah,
When you identify the resistance, you can often work with it. Now, if someone's acting out too severely, they may need obviously more structure or more at risk, need more structure, like suicide,
y-
homicide, things like
yeah,
that. But often what I saw was that ended up inpatient or long-term residential could have easily been dealt with in my office, easily with some support system if they're addicts, with recovery, with maybe a structured outpatient, things like that. They didn't need the structure that a long-term residential or sometimes even an intensive inpatient would give them, unless they
yeah,
needed detox, of course, you
yeah,
know. So,
yeah.
but there's a specific type of long-term treatment that I wanted to mention here for people to be aware of because I've known some of the patients that I treated, if they hadn't gone through these programs, would not have been treatable by me. And
Sure.
that's a wilderness program.
Okay.
Wilderness programs are unique long-term residential programs.
Yes, they are.
And they're where kids go to literally, they live with counselors in the outdoors and
Yeah,
they learn to cook for themselves, dig holes for their own poop and pee and, their own tents, and literally some kids get a high degree of value from them if they have some really cool staff.
yeah,
And like I said, I've treated a couple kids
yeah,
that if it hadn't been for that program, even one from a long-term residential said to me, if he hadn't had experience with love and moments in a
yeah.
residential program, he doesn't know if he'd be sober. And
Sure.
this guy just contacted me recently after years and years for a reference so he could become a professional in a specific kind of area, and need a reference, and gladly would have given a reference. I didn't have his file anymore. It'd been so long, you know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
anyway, hopefully he'll succeed in the realm that he's going into. And, but he was one that said, if I hadn't felt those things, I might not have ever gotten sober and stayed sober. And he's been sober a long time now. Another
Awesome.
kid that I'm treating right now, same thing. Did a tremendous amount for him, tremendous amount, because he had really excellent staff. He began to really feel cared about. So he then was able to use the principles that they taught to actually do some real growing. And he went from there to long-term residential, which succeeded to some degree. But anyway, my point is there's all kinds of varieties of interactions that people have in treatment. But some of these long programs, very intensive programs, can be very helpful. So I say for long-term residential, I say for wilderness, a specific type, you've got to find the ones that are really doing kick butt jobs
It's
because they go
hard
in
to find.
cycles. It's based
Yeah.
on, I don't care what people tell you how nice a brochure is, it's based on the staff of those programs. When they got good
Yeah.
staff that know how to love people well, know how to do therapy, counseling well, because they know how to care about people well, a lot of more kids, young adults, are going to get the help they need than the programs that are just cycling through counselors that aren't trained or too dysfunctional themselves still, etc. And they're a waste, and kids again feel trapped and want to escape versus feel cared about and help to feel better and be able to function better in this world.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I can recommend to people. It's really weird that you got to go by the press. If kids have been through it, they really recommend it. That's the biggest resource you can have to recommend a program.
Yeah. Yeah. I once worked with an adolescent, and his older brother went to a wilderness program and got sober, got out, got his master's degree, went
Whoa.
back and then worked at the
Yeah.
exact same program,
Right on. Yeah.
because like it
Yeah.
helped him so much.
Yeah.
So I know good examples. I also know very bad examples.
I
And,
know. I know.
I want everyone to be aware that there's different types of wilderness programs. Some of them are very time limited. It's like, we're going to only do 90 days. We're going to go to base camp for two
Right.
weeks. And then
Right.
after we go to base camp, we're going to go out into the woods or whatever for a month and a half. And then we're going to come back to base camp and process everything. So there's that kind of model. There's another kind of model where they have like an outpatient treatment center that they start at, and then from the outpatient treatment center, then they go into the wilderness, and then they do their thing, and then they come back. So that's a different kind of model. I know of like one up in like Oregon or whatever that does that. And so there's also less structured models where they don't have much of a philosophy or anything like that. So be careful about those. There's another thing that's affiliated with this, even though it's not directly the same business in most cases, which is kidnapping. So sometimes,
Good
and
point.
this has
Let
happened less. This has
You got to
happened
let
less.
parents know about this model.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
this has happened a lot less in the last 5 to 10 years, but basically from the 80s through the early 2010s, there weren't really any laws on the books in most states. So there are sober escort services, sober companion services, sober transportation services. There's all these like euphemisms that people have used, and many of these companies are good companies, just so we're clear. So it's
Right.
not a, I'm
Right.
not just trying to say they're all bad, just so we're clear.
No, no, I
So
know. Yeah.
there are many different types of
Right.
sober companion companies and transport companies and crisis case management companies that are trying to do good work. So those folks are out there and it's hard to find, but you can find them. I can help you find them. But for the longest time, because these were out of control kids that parents had given up on and principals and police had given up on even, that the parents would throw up their hands and find one of these transport companies that would literally come at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I've heard stories and I've talked to patients who've been through this. They come
Yeah.
at 2 or 3 in the morning. They wake you up in the middle of the night. Like, this is one of my favorite stories. It was very traumatic, but we were able to laugh about it because it'd been some years and stuff. But like, I worked with an adolescent who was kidnapped, literally transported to a wilderness program. And it's these two like 6'5" like giant behemoths, and he's like this 15-year-old weakling who's screw you, dad, and all this stuff. It was like running away from home and breaking
Right.
stuff at school and using drugs and all this stuff. He's an out of control teenager you'd see on like Jerry Springer or whatever. And uh but the parents had no spine. Like, to put it simply, they had no backbone in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. And so they hired this transport company, and these two behemoth men come, wake him up, toss him out of bed, literally, not metaphorically, right? Physically assault him, toss him out of bed, zip tie his hands behind his back, and pick him up while he's kicking and screaming, and what the hell's happening to me, and put him in the back of an SUV, and they drive him in the back of this SUV. They toss some cigarettes his way. Listen, if you're good and you're quiet, you can smoke, you can do whatever you want. If you try to hit us, you're going to come back and zip tie you again, and all this stuff. And they transport him to some place, I think in Montana or whatever at the time. And like, that was a standard practice that didn't get
It
talked
was.
about
It
for
was. Yeah.
decades.
Yeah. It's
And
been
there are
probably
people,
20, 30 years ago that was popular. But
it
yes, it
was
was. Yeah.
very popular in the
Yeah.
80s and 90s. There started to be news stories about scandals and all these things in the late 90s, early 2000s, but people were still doing it in the early 2000s through the early 2010s. But then a lot of states are in like 2008, 2009, 2010 started putting laws in the book saying, if you do this, it's kidnapping and you can go to jail and all this stuff. So most of these companies went out of business or reformed themselves and just became normal case management and crisis
Right.
intervention
Right.
services.
Yeah.
So there's a compassionate, non-illegal, traumatic way of doing it. But just know, if your kid's out of control and you want to call one of these transport services, ask them how they're trained. And if they say something like, "What do you mean?" That's a problem. Because there are all sorts of intervention skills and crisis case management skills you can
Right.
learn
Right.
to tolerate and deal with people who feel and are out of control to help them get from point A to point B. And so be careful. If you need transport
Right.
services because you don't have the time or you're disabled or whatever the reason, please vet them very carefully because how they're trained will dictate how they treat your loved one. And sometimes transportation is necessary, right? If you're busy working and you literally cannot take off work to help your loved one get to some residential somewhere or wilderness program, that's okay. There are companies that will do it compassionately, thoughtfully, and not like traumatically. So that's okay. Just be careful.
Right.
For what it's worth.
You betcha. Good points, man. I haven't heard about that. I didn't think about that for decades.
I
But
hear
yeah,
about it all the time still.
that was really, do you really? Wow. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I've heard of failures, but again, they're not all failures, but the kids I saw had failed a lot of those programs, but some of them been helped by them too and
Yeah.
made it possible to
Agreed.
go on with other kinds of treatment.
I think
All right.
wilderness is great.
All right. There's another model close to my heart that doesn't hardly exist anymore, if it does at all, called a therapeutic community. Do you know what
Mm.
those are?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
had one not far from you for a long time, out of Camarillo State Hospital.
Say more about it.
I trained at Camarillo State Hospital in a thing called the Experience, which was for adolescents and young adults. They also had
Hmm.
an adult program, and kids that ended up there were in CYC, Catholic Youth Authority, CYA, Catholic Youth Authority, and their choice was go to this place, therapeutic community, or go to jail. The
Yeah.
adult was the same. You go to prison or you go to the adult program, the family called the family. The young one was called the Experience. So I literally had to be a client to train in this program when I was in undergraduate school. And I went out there for a quarter. We had quarters at where I went to school. And it was quite an experience, to
Hmm.
use the word experience. They had 10 positions against a wall. They literally broke you down, broke all your defenses down, all the games you'd played to avoid looking at yourself. They had pedestal therapy. You stand behind a chair, everybody else lines up, and you tell them what you think of them. They had fishbowl, put you in the middle, people around the outside.
Yeah.
A very intense program that made my professor worry about me because I was living there for the first couple weeks before I got to go home. And I learned a lot, man. And it helped some kids that were really tough cases. And my comment about it, very powerful, powerful approach done by people that had great maturity and respect for other people. You cannot have that kind of power with somebody
Yeah.
and misuse it because you have a ton of power. But these people were so respectful. I admired, just like you with John, I
Yeah.
admired the social worker on that unit because
Yeah.
they did things with kids that were extremely confrontive, extremely intense. Like if you didn't pick up your cigarette butts,
Yeah.
you'd
Yeah.
wear you'd wear a string of cigarette butts around. If you didn't put your chair back, you'd have to carry your chair around all day, all day. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
really made a point. But these people did it very judiciously,
Hmm.
with great care with people. I remember we went on an out trip, and these kids didn't have money, and I'm sitting there at an amusement park buying myself something to eat. I got the hell chewed out of me.
Yeah.
And it made me think about, man, thoughtless, Lockwood. You're
Yeah.
thoughtless,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And it helped me grow too. It scared the hell out of Dr. Wing, my professor,
Yeah.
but it really helped me grow a lot. And you could say it was part of what eventually led to me getting sober. It was in my background. It was really a powerful experience. So I don't want to leave that out. I don't know if there are any programs around still like that.
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
here in SoCal,
Okay.
there's a place called, I think it's still open, called The Ranch, which
The
basically does
ranch.
exactly what you're describing.
Okay. Okay.
Now, the attitudes and practices that you're describing, which are moderately confrontational to very confrontational,
Yeah, it can be highly.
yeah, to like high accountability culture, right?
Oh, complete.
Very,
Yeah.
very, very rigid rules
Can't
is one way
hide.
of describing that. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet.
Like
You bet.
that still exists, but it doesn't exist in specific communities anymore. Most of that has transferred to sober livings. So
Really?
many of the sober
Did not know that.
livings, yes, yes. Now It's really a situation by situation thing, though. So, for instance, I know a place out here in LA, in Hollywood, that pretty much works with homeless LGBT people. And it's called the Van Ness House. And so they live and practice exactly that. If you screw up in any way, you're writing a paper and you're explaining your paper to the whole community. If you don't do your chore, you get twice the chores and all these kinds of things. And it's all about accountability to yourself, your recovery, your goals, and your community. And anything that you do that harms any of those three things, you're going to explain to your community every time. So you have community house meetings every day because people are screwing up all the time, right? All the time. And
Right.
it works for a lot of people because, especially for a lot of people that are like recently homeless, for instance, their experience is they have no structure, no accountability, so it often kind of shoves them back into a more like ordinary way of functioning. So that still exists. Now, a lot of sober livings only like take bits and pieces of what you described and incorporate them. So you would be hard pressed to find a lot of those communities, but many sober livings try to do that. So they're very rigid, high accountability sober livings, and very like, come, this is a hotel sober livings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, for the audience, you got to know the program enough to know, do these people use the power that they have in these kind of approaches in a very healthy way? Because they can be very powerful and positive for people. I saw that with the kids I was with, man. And I assume the same happened in the adult program too. You know, the kids that were just destined to be in prison ended up changing their whole life through this experience, because this is a program that was open ended. You didn't get out until you were really ready to function out there in the world. And then you started
Yeah.
having home visits and things like that to integrate back into the world.
The other thing I'd like to say that kind of
Yeah.
dovetails with that specifically that you just said is I would be careful about sending someone to one of these programs because not everyone really can handle it or even needs it, obviously. It's a very rare type of person that needs it. However, I also believe that almost everyone who struggles with especially a serious drug problem or serious criminal behavior has no respect for themselves, which usually
Yeah.
means which usually means that they're not going to have any respect for other people. And so
Right on. Right.
any attempt
Right.
to encourage a person or coerce a person, depending upon the rules, to have respect for yourself or other people, they're going to resist. They're not going to want to deal with. And so I am not one of these hippies who's like everyone gets to be loved and treated nicely, because that doesn't work. It just literally doesn't work. And
No,
so
no.
if you have a young adult or a child, for instance, that's going to like a highly structured sober living with high accountability culture, and they're complaining to you about the fact that they make me write a paper or like essentially again, there's valid complaints like they're mistreating me, they're hurting me. Those things happen, so we have to be careful. I'm trying to be careful about what I say here. So there's valid complaints, and we should pay attention to
Right.
those and gather
Right.
lots of data and see and talk to the staff because if they're doing something abusive, you can usually tell. However, most people, especially with serious addictions or serious antisocial behavior, are going to lie through their teeth about any attempt at accountability. Most people, because accountability is shaming and accountability doesn't feel good. And there's just so many reasons, just psychologically,
You're right. And you,
why
but
they
you have
will
to have
tr
a good staff there that can explain these things to family members or other people that are interested in the person that's going into one of these programs, so they understand when they get complaints. A lot of those complaints are whining because someone's finally holding them accountable.
I wouldn't even
And,
call it whining. I would call it manipulation, which I've
well, a
said,
lot of manipulation too through
yeah,
whining. They're hurting me. They're
y-
making me feel bad. Well, you might
whatever,
have to feel bad to get better,
And
you
the
know?
fascinating thing about this is specifically just for all the families listening, like I have
Yeah.
spent most of my career running programs where there's like a super high structured sober living or rehab where people try to complain to their families. And then when I have a completely neutral. Like I don't try to explain the person's behavior. I don't try to dismiss the patient's complaints. When I just have a very matter of fact, non-coercive conversation with families, they always get it. I have never, even the sickest
Right.
families who are very enmeshed or want to believe their precious
Right.
little child or whatever, always get it because I explain it in the simplest possible terms. What did
Well,
this
that's
person
my
say?
point. Yeah.
What did this person say happened to them? What what actually happened to them? Like where's the truth? In the middle somewhere, probably. What's the reason this boundary exists? What's the reason this rule exists? What's the reason this punishment exists? Families universally get it.
Yeah, you bet.
Universally. Because once you see that it's a manipulation, if it is a manipulation, then it's crystal clear. It's like something clicks and they're like, wow, of course it's a manipulation. Because part of how people stay sick is through manipulating people.
Yeah, my original home group, which is still my home group in AA, you weren't going to manipulate us.
Yeah.
You weren't going to have us feeling sorry for you. You're going to have us telling you what you got to do for your life to get better, to stay sober
Hmm.
and your life to get better. And people that those kind of programs, I get them. You explain that really nicely. Um, so I think that's the programs we wanted to go over today, and I think we touched enough on out of town versus in town by the idea of how much you're out of control, how difficult the family situation is for the patient going to treatment, things like that, determine whether you should stay in town or out of town. But stay in town if you can, if you can.
Can I say more about that? Because I think I have
Yeah,
a
go
couple of
ahead.
thoughts
Go
that are worth
ahead.
it.
Sure. Yeah.
So, like, I agree with you that one of the metrics is how out of control the person is. I think that's a useful thing to think about. I also
Hmm.
would like to make a pitch for the fact that staying in town is useful, especially if there's a lot of repair that you can do in the community, in the family, and things like that. Also,
Yeah.
and this you might disagree with, and that's totally okay. My experience has been a lot of people that have come out here, especially the young adults that I've worked with. I've had a lot of success in the programs that I've run where I've helped some transplants create a life out here. And so, and it's not like me alone, it's the entire system and the treatment center and all this stuff. But, you know, many of the young adult programs I've run in my life, even like John's program back in the day, like sometimes we would get referrals from out of town. And in many
Hmm.
cases, you could find and create a life in a new place, and that might actually be the best thing for you in some situations.
No,
So I'm
that
not
is true.
and I'm not trying to say that, you know, if your family's sick, you shouldn't try to fix things with them. Actually,
No, I know.
you should try to
Yeah.
fix things with them,
Right.
100%. But
Ideally.
also,
Right.
yeah, ideally.
Yeah.
But also like I'm just going to give a super simple example. One of the young adults I worked with 5 years ago, this young man, a very smart kid from the East Coast, and had like a pretty typical East Coast life. But one of the major problems he had is that his main love in life, I guess if you want to call it that, is music. And so many of the programs out there that he went to helped him cope and DBT and all these things,
Sure.
but they never really addressed the community piece of it for him, which is not a region specific thing. Anyone can create good community, right? But
No, not anyone can. You've been
well,
around some good programs that create good community. I
I
have too here.
also I'm
Yeah.
also a leader who creates community, so it's part of what I
Gotcha.
do.
Gotcha.
But but like I believe if with the right training and mentorship you can learn how to create community in any particular program. I think you can, not that you will. But
Right.
I'm just saying that wasn't the unique problem. The unique problem he faced was the lack of community where he was from, in addition to no one who is in the industry whatsoever. Right. And so being here in Southern California, this is the industry still to this day, especially the music industry. Not that there aren't some little parts in North Carolina and Tennessee and all that stuff in Texas,
I wouldn't call
but
Nashville little, Austin little either in Texas now, but you're right.
and yeah, I mean for certain genres of music, but this is a pretty
Yeah,
classic like rock and roll kid anyways.
I got you.
So like he didn't have much community and he didn't have any I would call it career opportunities is probably the way people will hear it, but the way I would describe it is he didn't have a chance to actually be himself. Because if you have no opportunities to perform and you're a very performance oriented person, you're an exhibitionistic kind of person. And the most adaptive way of doing that is through music for this particular individual.
Right, right.
Then like you're going to die on the East Coast if there aren't the right kinds of venues for you and there's not the right kind of sober people who do this as well. But out here in SoCal, there's all sorts of sober recording industry
Tons.
people,
Right, tons. You
right?
betcha.
There's
Yeah,
some in the Midwest and there's some in
yeah,
Texas and but like
right.
this is a huge place for that. And so when you take them to
Good
all
point.
these Malibu meetings and these West Side of LA meetings where there's like very famous people, who do this, it's like, wow, there's someone I can be. But if you just go to like a meeting where there's a bunch of like factory workers or whatever it is, like you'll find good people who can help you, but that's not the
Right.
same thing as seeing like someone you could be, if that makes
Exactly.
sense. And
Yeah,
so
no, good point.
for me, I
Good
would
point.
like to make a pitch that sometimes there is some utility to finding a region where a program exists where maybe a transplant could be useful. It's kind of like the same thing in like college. Like some people go out of state for
Yeah,
college.
I was just thinking about that with kids in
Some
recovery
people
in college. Yeah,
some people stay in state for college, right?
right,
I
right.
don't think there's a drastic difference in the quality of education at most undergrads anymore, but culturally, you go to a Harvard to be with other rich kids who are super nerdy or super spoiled, or you go to a Berkeley to be with other.
You just pissed a lot of Harvard grads off, son.
Let them. It's true, and everyone there says it and knows it. Or you go to Berkeley or San Jose State to be with a bunch of other hippies. You know what I mean? Like you go for the culture, and I think there's something important about the culture beyond just the principles of recovery and the types of
Oh,
treatments
absolutely.
but also like
Absolutely.
the greater community you find yourself in, because anyone who's trying to get healthy should be trying to get back into a community, right? And so if you're going to get stable somewhere, but not reintegrated into that community, then I think you're wasting your time and your money personally, unless you really need to go to this special program and then fly
No,
back or
no,
whatever.
you're right. Culture and community has a whole lot to do with recovery from alcohol addictions, obviously, but also mental health problems too.
Yeah,
Community can do such a lot to keep people engaged in the recovery resources that they normally would not be engaged in. When you start palling around with some people you went through treatment with, that can keep you going for a long time.
yeah.
Heck, we went to dinner every night before our meeting. And there
Mm,
were probably anywhere from 8 to 16 guys out of the group that would come, and our group got to the size about 35 or 40. But it was
yeah,
a tremendous amount of fellowship, particularly for the guys that were single. The more successful we all got, the less we went to dinner together because we built our own lives. But boy, for those early years, very essential to have community. And
yeah.
you know how to do it, but you also had some good experience with people like RJ that helped. And one of the things that I've heard you say about RJ, excellent at building community.
Phenomenal. The one of
Yeah,
the best,
yeah,
one of the
yeah,
absolute best. And to this day, I mean, one of the reasons I still work with him is because that's what he does in an excellent way. Be
absolutely.
because it's
Yeah,
essential. It's essential for people to actually be healthy, to have the right kind of community. Now that's different for different people, but
I know.
staying in state or out of state it's more than just how specialized the program is and their success rates and the quality of their staff, but it's also like what are you setting yourself up for? Because after you're finished, maybe you can fly back and build your community there, and maybe that's the best thing. And that's true for a lot of people. For other
But that's
people,
also very hard to do. To come
yeah,
back after being someplace and getting
yes,
connection with people, I found that that's one of the reasons I was so against sending people out of town. It's so hard for them when they come back to connect with the people here. They
yeah,
can, but it's very hard. Whereas they got
yeah,
a leg up if they stay and keep community where they are.
Yeah,
So it's a complicated issue, and well said. I'm glad you brought that up for people that are listening, because
yeah,
those are the kind of issues you're not going to hear about community with a lot of programs. You're going to hear about their facilities or counselors, maybe they're counselors, but all the services they've got. You're not going to hear as much about the people they got that are really great with loving people and doing good counseling and therapy. And you're not going to hear a lot about community,
and
alumni groups, and things like that, and how active they are and how they
yeah,
engage people, because those are so essential for people to get well. So I hope these ideas were helpful to you. And we're not even done. This is only part three of resources. There's so many resources. We haven't even gotten to the self-help ones yet.
yeah.
So stay tuned, because more is to come, and we hope this was helpful to you. Take
Just one
care.
quick thought.
Oh,
Uh,
go ahead. Go ahead,
just
real
one
quick.
quick thought. If you are sending your loved one away,
Yeah.
one thing you should absolutely ask the treatment staff or whoever runs the place is, what do they do to help me connect back here? Right? Because like the programs that I've consulted for and helped fix, we've changed things like, let's start getting them in some Zoom meetings back where they live. Let's start getting them a
Oh,
therapist back where they
excellent.
live before they
Right.
leave. So
Before they leave.
how do you set people
Excellent.
up to start already having relationships before they leave? Is something you can ask
Right.
them.
Right. For sure. Good
Yeah.
point. Good point. All right. Thank you for your time. And like I said, there's more to come.
Thanks for listening to Encouragement for Living Life. We hope you were encouraged by today's discussion. If you have a question, you can email us at lockwoodwithlockwood@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it on one of our shows. Hope to see you next time.